time for the 12th Doctor era. This time it was partly a rewatch, mainly a watch though. First time since the 7th Doctor era has this kind of thing happened. But let's not dilly-dally, let's get into Peter Capaldi's reign as the Doctor. First, we get to the only bad story with number 35, Hellbent. Yep, this one being at the bottom, what a surprise. What hasn't been said about this colossal disappointment of an episode? After arguably Peter Capaldi's best episode with Heaven Sent, we got this. The Doctor eating soup with the Shobogans. Beautiful. Alright, so this episode is incredibly infamous, and while I don't hate it as much as other people do, I still don't like it. It was kinda just dull for the first half, like it just sort of meandered around with no real purpose of where it was going. You have the Doctor showing up, popping out of the confession dial, hanging out with the Shobogans for a hot sec, yelling at Rassilon, everyone defying him for some reason, and then reaching the worst point of the episode, the resurrection of Clara. Now, everyone knows the hatred of Clara. She is arguably the worst companion of Doctor Who up until this point. Whiny, annoying, pretentious, a poser, and makes herself seem more important than she actually is. Doesn't help that the showrunner also pushed that idea as well. Through her years with the 12th Doctor, she tried so hard to be like the Doctor when that simply wasn't her place. And guess what? She got fucking killed for it. She thought she had the universe eating out of the palm of her hand, and turns out she was yet another human that just flew too close to the sun. Ignoring the fact that the Doctor and Clara should have gone their separate ways like 5 different times at this point, but she finally got fucking killed. Barely 2 episodes later, they bring her back. Because Stephen fucking Moffat always has to have his happy ending. So with that, how does the rest of the episode go? The Matrix stuff is kinda interesting, but there's no story here. This whole episode literally exists as a plot device to bring Clara back, and that's it. There is the culmination of the hybrid stuff, but that was such a shitty and tacked on arc that I pretty much forgot about it most of the time. Then there's also the Me character, who I honestly fucking hate at this point. I didn't think she was that bad at first when introduced, but by this episode, I honestly grew to fucking hate her. She's just such an annoying Mary Sue, and not at all necessary to the overall plot line. She just exists to be a cocktease for the hybrid plotline that nobody fucking cares about. So this episode just doesn't work at all. There is literally no story, Clara is brought back for no reason, Me is annoying, being on Gallifrey is next to pointless, and it's just an episode that didn't need to exist. Now to the mediocre episodes with number 34, In the Forest of the Night. Fun fact about this episode, this was originally the episode that broke me. I quit watching Doctor Who after this episode because it was, in my head, that bad. Or just a trigger of like, why am I watching this show anymore? Anyway, while I don't think it's as bad as I remember it being, it's still not a good episode. Kinda just mediocre at best. While the premise is a pretty good idea, with trees being overgrown everywhere for some reason, it mainly falls flat because of how it's executed. Because it's clear it's trying to be more like a classic Who episode with the premise and whatnot, but it ends up just being kind of boring and resolution being really ridiculous and not in a good way. Plus, the little girl is a horrible actor, and how her sister just kind of shows up at the end was honestly more funny than it was heartwarming. Just sort of a light run-of-the-mill episode where trees save us from solar flares, because sure. Number 33, the Zygon Invasion / the Zygon Inversion. Ah yes, a resolution from the forgotten plotline from Day of the Doctor. Oh joy. I still stand by the fact that the Zygon plotline in Day of the Doctor was there to just fill time and have a famous villain, and were immediately forgot about once their time was over. But it turns out we just got a giant 2-part epilogue with this story. Osgood is another character I don't really care for. She's not bad, just kind of annoying. And the fact that this entire story is based around her and her relationship with her Zygon duplicate didn't resonate with me. Again, not bad, I just didn't care. While the Zygon plot is kind of interesting, the twist involving Clara was pretty good and some highlights here and there. This sort of just exists to have a proper end to that arc from the 50th anniversary. Not incredibly awful, just incredibly boring. But the famous speech the Doctor makes towards the end of the second episode is pretty good. Number 32, The Husbands of River Song. I really wanted to like this one more. I like River's song, as I stated before, and having her interact with the 12th Doctor seemed fun, and it was. But that's it. Pretty much the rest of the story was kind of stupid and cringy. While I'm usually pretty forgiving of the Christmas specials, the stupidity outside of the Doctor and River's relationship just made me constantly roll my eyes. The humor was too stupid, the story was incredibly dumb in one note, and I was just annoyed by it. But the chemistry between Kingston and Capaldi is impeccable, and the best between any Doctor and River. But outside of that, ugh. Now to the decent stories with number 31, The Magician's Apprentice / The Witch's Familiar. This story was a bit much. I get that Moffat wanted a really big opener for Series 9, but what we got wasn't a good opener. The first episode in this two-parter was pretty much entirely pointless. You could have done everything that was in the first part probably in a cold open, or at least the first few minutes of one episode. I was absolutely bored to tears watching the first episode. Pretty much nothing happened. The only thing worthwhile is that the Doctor, Clara, and Missy got to Skaro, and that's it. Then half of the second episode felt mostly pointless as well. It's certainly an improvement, but not by much. While Missy was pretty important to the overall story in regards to helping out Clara and that sort of thing, I still felt she wasn't totally necessary for the overall narrative. I feel like this should have been a Master story or a Dalek story, not both. Unlike the Series 8 two-parter finale, which we'll get to soon enough, Missy felt more important there than she did here. So with all that, we have the proper return of the Daleks and a return of Davros, which was fine, I guess. It was nice to see Skaro again, as well as some intriguing choices with Davros, but I was still pretty underwhelmed. As well as Davros' eyes opening for the first time, which makes no sense. And they're not even weird looking, foggy, like they have cataracts or something. No, they're just totally fucking normal eyes. Really? Anyway, so this had an overall decent story. It had some highlights here and there. Peter Capaldi was having a ton of fun. Michelle Gomez is great as always, and it was nice to see the Daleks. But the execution just majorly fell flat for me. Plus, this introduces the most idiotic story arc in Doctor Who history, the hybrid. Number 30. Kill the Moon. This very infamous episode with one of the most ridiculous endings ever. The thing is, though, the build-up isn't actually half bad, even though the thinly veiled commentary is poorly written. You have this weird thing going on with the moon, we don't know what's wrong, people of course want to blow it up, and that sort of thing. Which isn't that bad, it's a good mystery. But then you start to realize it's a very obvious commentary on abortion, and it just comes off as weird. Especially in a Doctor Who episode. I know how bad things get for the next era and how bad things are handled there, but here it's not bad, just kinda off and weird for Doctor Who. Now, I know Doctor Who has always had commentary for certain things, but it's still structured in a way where it comes off as a fantastical idea first and commentary second, most of the time. At least when it's done well. Here it's just the commentary, but with a moon egg baby instead of an actual baby. Doesn't come off as strange or fantastical, just off-putting. But outside of that, it's okay, I guess. It was kinda intriguing, and the astronaut was a semi-interesting character. But the rest of it, the stuff with Clara and the girl, the commentary, the ridiculous ending, is just kinda dumb. Not horrible by any means, but just dumb. Can't really explain it better. Off, dumb, and weird. Moving on. Number 29. The Woman Who Lived. I give this episode a major point in one area. No Clara. Woohoo! But honestly, that's the best thing I can say about it. The rest of the episode is fine. I never cared about the whole me storyline, and it gets started here, kind of, at least in a proper sense, in terms of her becoming me. You know what I mean. This is sort of just a run-of-the-mill pseudo-historical with the addition of a character we've seen before. Cool, I guess. There's not a whole lot to say about it, and it's pretty forgettable. So moving on. Number 28, Dark Water / Death in Heaven. Our introduction of Missy and our reintroduction to the Cybermen. The first episode is kinda boring, not gonna lie. Usually Stephen Moffat has really good setup and kinda shit payoff, but here it's the opposite. I just found the build-up to not be wholly interesting. I think some ideas are cool, like with the actual Dark Water and where Danny actually is. but the rest of it I was kinda bored by. You have Clara being incredibly annoying, as always. The relationship with her and Danny is not incredibly believable, and the way his death is treated is honestly so cliched that I thought it was a joke at first. It just came off as really unintentionally funny to me. The stuff with Danny and the boy was, I think, hinted at once, but never stated, so it just comes off as confusing. The second episode is a bit of an improvement. We have a good cliffhanger and a good return of the Cybermen, but the fact that they are used as a simple tool for Missy taints them a little bit, as well as the fact that the cyber pollen is another example of people not really understanding the Cybermen and how they operate. It does have some touching moments between Clara and Danny in the second episode, but they still kind of come off as half-assed and not totally believable. I do like Missy here. She is certainly an improvement over John Sim. She's funny, but still rather menacing and can command a room easily. I also like the moment with Brigadier Cyberman. A little weird and off-putting, but I think it's a good homage to the Brigadier that I appreciated. Overall, it's not a great two-part finale, as the first episode is kind of boring, the Cybermen don't really do much of interest and are only a tool for Missy, and the stuff with Danny and Clara isn't believable in the slightest. It has some good moments here and there that prevent it from being worse, but all in all, it's just a decent story. Number 27, Deep Breath. After the greatness that is the 11th hour, we unfortunately had to get this drivel. I mean, it's better than the Christmas Invasion, but not by much. We have yet another appearance of the Paternoster gang, and they are just as forgettable here as they are in all their other appearances. The main story and villain was pretty forgettable. I remember the dinosaur, which definitely didn't serve any huge importance to the story. The post-regenerative stuff is much of the same. Kinda amusing, but also very annoying. While the main villain was kind of a cool idea, I feel like there wasn't enough attention brought to his plan, or at least made it more interesting. Clara in this episode is arguably the worst she's ever been. If this were any other companion, I probably wouldn't shake two shits at it. But the fact that this is Clara, the impossible girl, who literally saw every life of the Doctor from Hartnell to Smith, how the fuck is she this surprised by regeneration? She saw every life of the Doctor, witnessed every moment of his life. Why is she like, oh, how is my hunky chin man gone? So much so that his past self had to fucking call her. How fucking ridiculous is that? So yeah, if it wasn't for Clara this episode being an absolute fucking idiot, the main plot was given a boost of interest and the regenerative stuff wasn't as annoying, I would have rated this higher. But due to the fact it's pretty forgettable despite good ideas, and Clara being completely fucking intolerable, it's lower on the list. Number 26, The Pyramid at the End of the World. One of the weaker episodes from Series 10. While the monks are a decent villain, the rest of the episode doesn't really have a ton of interest for me personally. It's kind of just a waiting game of what will eventually happen in regards to the monks taking over. It doesn't really have a sense of intrigue or suspense. It kind of just happens. With that, it was a pretty boring episode. This could have almost been a cold open for The Lie of the Land, with how much actually happens, which is very little, similar to The Magician's Apprentice / The Witch's Familiar. Plus, the end of the episode is probably the worst thing Bill has ever done, which is a bit of a shame since I do like her as a companion. Outside of this, she's great, but letting the monks pretty much take over the world was very much a Clara thing to do. In terms of other good things, the design of the monks is kind of cool, Peter Capaldi is great as always, and Nardole had some good lines here and there, but outside of this, not a ton of great things happen in this episode. Number 25, Listen. More good potential squandered. While the ways they tried to expand on Danny Pink in this episode were somewhat interesting, playing with time, some spooky ideas here and there, it results in an episode that should have been a lot better. The idea of a monster you can't see is terrifying, but it never came across like that to me. Someone who had a petrifying fear of the dark in their childhood. And it's a shame because I love that idea, but it was never executed properly, with that never creepy. Then on top of that, the idea of it coming about doesn't make any sense, since the way the Doctor got this idea was through Clara being there when he was a young boy, because it's just once again Moffat trying to make Clara more important than she really is. But the fact that Clara was there to be the monster that grabbed his ankle, how would there eventually be another actual monster the way the Doctor describes? It doesn't really come off as cool and experimental, it comes off as ridiculous. Orson Pink was another cool idea, and I did like those small scenes in the future. Had a lot more potential, could have been really, really good, but it ends up just being kind of fine. Number 24, Face the Raven. The best thing I could say about this episode is that Clara gets murdered! Thank fucking God! I know it doesn't last long, but a man can dream, can he? Outside of that, I do like the return of Rigsy. I always liked his character. That's maybe me just being a biased Doom Patrol fan, but he is good here too. As well as the fact that this episode is a pretty decent murder mystery and has some cool production design. We again get the return of Me, and she just seems like one of those characters that Moffat is trying to push to be the next big thing, but it fucking failed miserably because nobody likes the character of Me, as well as the fact that she purely exists as a red herring for the stupid hybrid story arc. Again, this is one of those simple episodes where I don't really have a ton to say, just that it was a fun but intriguing episode, with a good mystery. A returning character I liked, a returning character I hate, and Clara getting murdered. Relatively good stuff. Number 23, The Caretaker. This one was a bit more fun. Again, not really great, but still kind of fun. It has the Doctor going undercover as the caretaker, aka a janitor, of Coal Hill School, which brings about some rather funny scenes here and there, as well as the robot in and of itself being really funny to me, like a toy that won't shut up that keeps banging into walls and scurrying all over the place. It just made me laugh, despite it being a pretty good threat. I think this episode, despite not exactly being genuinely great, it was more fun and enjoyable than some of the other episodes in Series 8, so I do give it an extra half point for that. Simple and to the point, highly enjoyable, some genuinely funny scenes, and the Doctor being great throughout. Good stuff. Now to the adequate stories with number 22, Last Christmas. This Christmas special isn't great, but I do have to majorly commend it and kinda respect it in a way. Why? It actually does try to do some experimental ideas in regards to the idea of the Doctor Who Christmas special. Usually others are just dumb feel-good stories to watch and enjoy while you're drunk and filled to the brim with food. But here it does have some intriguing ideas in regards to the villain and the story it's presenting in regards to dreams. It is a bit like Inception in regards to a dream within a dream within a dream, but I still think it works. For a lot of the running time, it feels like this weird and disjointed episode that was hard to get into. But when it was eventually revealed that they were having a shared dream because of these creatures, it slowly got more interesting and made more sense. Does that make it great? No, obviously not, because not one thing will excuse the entirety of a disjointed episode. It just makes more sense while also giving it maybe more rewatch value. So, with what it did and the story it told, made this a pretty fine watch. Maybe even a mighty fine watch. It had some nice moments between Danny and Clara as well, and offered another good ending for Clara, but unfortunately it had to be undone with another schmaltzy happy ending that has Clara continue her adventures with the Doctor. Man, I wish Shona became a companion, which was the plan if Jenna Coleman decided to fucking leave, but we had to be stuck with her sorry ass for another year. Number 21, The Girl Who Died. Where it all begins in terms of the Me storyline. Kind of. She's not Me yet, so she isn't ungodly annoying yet. So that certainly gets points. But it also gets points because I like the tone and setting of this story. It's extremely dark in tone, but it has a bit of cheesy fun sprinkled in with the villain. While you could say it messes with the tone a bit, and I am inclined to agree to an extent, I think the villain should have been toned down at least a little bit. But that is pretty much my only major qualm with the episode. Everything else was pretty well done. Has a bit of comedy in other places that doesn't lose the darker tone like the villain does. Capaldi delivers a great performance, like always, but here is noteworthy. And I like the idea of the Doctor speaking baby being used in a serious context. That was easily one of the best parts of the episode, and I dare say the series in general. Yes, the story is imbalanced in terms of tone, and it did lose me in that aspect, but the rest of it was a damn fine episode. Although the stuff with the Doctor choosing this face as a reminder to save people was really dumb and contrived, and it should have been left alone. Because in that case, how was the Fifth Doctor inspired by the Commander in Arc of Infinity? Whatever. Number 20, Extremis. So with this episode, I wanted to like it more, but I felt that it was kinda forgettable. It does have its very intriguing idea of the world being in a simulation and trying to have some more experimental ideas in regards to a 3-episode arc, as well as bringing religion into it, which is certainly interesting, especially for Doctor Who. I don't believe that's ever been outwardly spoken about until now, but please tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. You'll definitely do it anyway. Moving on, I felt that the main story was just kinda not great. Like, there wasn't enough bite to it to make it more interesting. It's pretty much, world is in a simulation, and yet another monster is invading Earth. Cool. That's kinda it. As well as the Doctor being blind, which doesn't add or subtract anything from the narrative. Just kinda there, and it isn't used as a crutch or anything like that, at least until Pyramid at the End of the World. So yeah, decent little episode, had some neat ideas, but it could have been much better and way more interesting. Next is number 19, The Lie of the Land. So here we have our dystopian story, which is pretty good. I like dystopian stories, but only if done right, and this one kinda gets it right. Like, you have the monks taking over and lulling the population into complacency, and Bill and Nardole must rescue the Doctor. There's probably some eye-rolling social commentary there in regards to America or something, because of course there would be. But outside of that, I felt that it was a good dystopian story, with a bit of a twist in regards to the Doctor. Even though it kinda seemed obvious, it was still kinda like, oh shit, what if that actually happens, the Doctor being evil? It has worked well enough before, and I do wish they kind of went farther with it, but I still kind of liked that side twist. The monks are good enough villains, sort of, saving us from ourselves, but also having those nefarious ideas that makes them the villain. Again, it has a bunch of really good ideas, a good story, and a good twist, kind of. Bit dull at points and kind of forgettable, but a good episode nonetheless. Now to the good stories, with number 18, Oxygen. This episode could have easily been the best of the best. It's written by Jamie Matheson, who has a really great track record in terms of Doctor Who episodes. And this, for the most part, was no exception. The problem with this episode was the telling and not showing. It was absolutely tiring. If you want to create an anti-capitalist message, fine. I don't entirely agree with it, but at the same time, RoboCop and Alien are some of my favorite movies. So the message can work if it's surrounded by a great script, and the message is subtle enough. Oxygen is one of those things, and it has a pretty damn good script. But there is just this annoying need to just keep constantly reminding the audience of what it's trying to convey. For the love of God, we get it. Corporations are evil. You can show us that in a good script. And the biggest problem is, it does. Unlike a preachy CW show, the script is really good, and the episode in and of itself is really well done. It has some cringy lines here and there, like the whole racist conversation, which was eye-rolling, but the main story is really interesting. It had some great setup, a good setting, memorable side characters, some intriguing lore, and some good twists along the way. The reason that this is a good story and not a very good or even a great story is the constant telling the audience the message it's trying to convey. With that, I had to knock it down a full point. Number 17, Smile. I remember seeing the preview for this way back when, and the idea of emoji robots made my eyes roll. I was very glad that I stopped watching the show, as it reaffirmed my suspicions about the show. However, upon watching, I was actually surprised with how much I liked this episode, mainly because the emoji robots are pretty much a one-off joke and the show is aware of how stupid the idea is. So moving on from that, I felt that this episode was a pretty well done mystery as to why the nanobots are doing all of this, as well as the fact I love how colorful and bright everything is. Like, the idea of something so nefarious happening within the context of something so bright and colorful is always fascinating to me, and the juxtaposition of those tones / ideas / concepts, whatever you like to call it. It's not amazing by any means, but it did surprise me with how much I liked it. Especially with this being Bill's first alien planet, kind of. Has some dated humor, but for the most part, a good episode. Number 16, Knock Knock. I wanted to like this one more, but I still thought it was a pretty well done episode. I think the execution of the concept was a little rickety, pun intended. The idea of the creaks in your house being evil is such a cool fucking concept, because it's doing what Doctor Who does best, taking a normal thing and making it scary. Plus, the production design / look of an all-wooden house kind of has a good eerie look to it, especially under certain lighting. The reason that this falls flat is that the story isn't terribly interesting, and the supporting characters are pretty bland. Like, they were the one-dimensional and, dare I say, wooden characters that exist in slashers, purely to get killed. With that, I don't care about them at all. David Suchet is great in his role. He is a magnificent actor, and he gave his all in this, despite not having a very big role. I liked the makeup on the mother character. It was pretty well done. Again, this is a great concept story, and has some good creepy moments, but the execution is faulty, and the characters are one note, but I still enjoyed what it did do right. Number 15, The Pilot. I think this is a very good soft reboot of the show, as it is very obvious in regards to the name. With this, I think it reestablishes everything really well. Who the Doctor is, what he's doing since the death of Clara, without going out of its way to mention her, establishing new companion Bill, reestablishing Nardole, and the lore of the show that is easily digestible. In addition, the story in regards to the alien is pretty well done. Like, it's not too complicated where people will get confused easily, but it's not simple enough where people will get bored. So it's a neat little bow for newer fans to get into the show, but still interesting enough for older fans to continue. It's not perfect, but for what its purpose is, I think it was well executed, as well as being a good story in and of itself. Plus, there's more personality established with Bill in this one episode than with Clara in her entire run. Number 14, Into the Dalek. A pretty good Dalek story. Has some good ideas surrounding the lore of the Dalek and their hatred for everyone else and thinking they are the superior race. While it does retcon certain aspects of the idea of the Dalek, the fact that it does do something rather different in regards to the structure of a Dalek story, I give it some points. Plus, the setting inside the Dalek has some damn good production design. I didn't totally hate the idea that the Dalek is actually not as anger-fueled alone as it is in its casing, and it's the chemical in the casing that makes them hate as much as they do. It's certainly a decent idea and pretty interesting. It's a bit of a weird retcon, and when it comes to all the other retcons in the show's history, it's not even close to the worst. Plus, it gives us somewhat interesting development in regards to this version of the Doctor, who seems to hate war more so than his other newer incarnations, probably the most since 9, maybe even more so. Clara isn't as annoying here as she usually is, and the character of Blue is pretty likable. It's a good episode, but it's not the most memorable thing ever, and the story is kind of forgettable in some areas, but it's still a good episode despite this. Number 13, Time Heist. A rather good episode that is somewhat undone by an incredibly obvious twist. A bunch of people, including the Doctor and Clara, must steal goods from the most secure bank vault in the universe by someone. Okay, cool premise, but even just hearing that premise, you know who the person behind it all is going to be. I totally forgot this episode even existed, yet I knew that the Doctor was going to be the person behind everything. Despite this, it's a fun and entertaining episode with some good ideas, some cool locations, some memorable characters, and an interesting enough story. It is painfully simple, but it manages to stick the landing despite the obvious twists. In any other era, this probably would have been much lower, but considering how faulty this era is, I give it a pass. Number 12, The Eaters of Light. This one I surprisingly liked more than I thought I would. I will say my biggest qualm with it is that it's pretty forgettable, but outside of that, I think it's a well-made episode. I think there are really good ideas in regards to the idea of growing up and taking responsibility, as well as a cool monster, and the lore of the crows, as well as the high-concept idea of the portal and intertwining historical events which I'm always a sucker for. It reintroduces the idea of the TARDIS translation circuit and a bit more of how it works in regards to speech and lips moving as well. You have some interesting aspects in regards to Missy becoming good, but not talked about a lot in this episode. Hence, it just feels like setup for next episode. It has some good jokes here and there, as well as some eye-rolling aspects, but for the most part, this was a surprisingly well-done episode with an intriguing story, a good monster, and some good themes. Now to the very good stories with number 11, Twice Upon a Time. This one is sort of an anomaly, mainly because it just shouldn't exist. It really shouldn't, but since Moffat couldn't let go of his precious Christmas specials, we got one last one, even if it didn't make any sense. But even with that, I still enjoyed what it did offer, for the most part. It is incredibly light on story, and it's more so about the characters involved and the development for each Doctor. I do wish it had more of a bite to it, because therefore it would give it more purpose to its existence, rather than Moffat wanted to do one last Christmas special before Chibnall nixed them. But it kind of meanders around with the concept and theme of death, rather than the story giving a purpose to the existence and core of that theme. The villain is barely a villain, even before the shocking twist that wasn't at all shocking, since it was incredibly obvious that the testimony weren't villains. It has a Dalek in it, because of course it does. I know Moffat denounced the rumor that they have to put the Daleks in every series, so the Terry Nation estate allows them to keep using them. But with appearances like this, it makes us hard to believe that isn't the case. I like Mark Gatiss as Captain Lethbridge Stewart. He did a good job, and brings out the more mortal side of dealing with death. He is kind of just there as a plot device, but again, the story is very character-driven, so what they do in fact do with his character was an interesting parallel to what the Doctors were going through. Bill feels kind of pointless here. She's just kind of there to feed the revelation that was barely a revelation in the first place. I really like the ending with showcasing the somewhat historically inaccurate Christmas truce in World War I. It was a good note to end on and wrapped everything up nicely. Now we get to the elephant in the room, the treatment of the First Doctor. I know people will defend this decision, but I simply cannot. Making the First Doctor sexist was so unfathomably disrespectful to William Hartnell and his legacy. I know the First Doctor era isn't perfect, and does it have some cringy dialogue here and there? Sure. But from what I remember, the First Doctor wasn't sexist, racist, bigoted, or prejudiced. Doctor Who was a show that was ahead of its time because it fed inclusive and equal beliefs in a rather true way than the gimmicky way it is now. Making the First Doctor sexist just to, comment on the dialogue of the 60s? Seriously, go fuck yourself. Every appearance of the First Doctor after his run, aka in 3 Doctors and 5 Doctors, gave him the utmost respect, and deservedly so. This almost shits all over that, and for almost no reason. Also, people forget the infamous smacked bottom comment was originally told to Susan, his granddaughter, the person he is related to, as they are a parent, hence why it's in the fucking name. Did your grandparents never threaten to smack you upside the head? Come on now. So, outside of the utter disrespect towards the First Doctor, despite a great performance from David Bradley, having little reason to exist, and lack of a real story, I still enjoyed this because I did like the ideas it presented, the themes, performances all around, and the ending. With the exception of the Clara happy ending, of course, where the Doctor remembers her because, Moffat. Number 10, Empress of Mars. Another great Ice Warrior story. While not as good as Cold War, I do very much like this story because of more lore it introduced when it comes to the Ice Warrior, as well as an intriguing look into a weird aspect of history that was forgotten, but not actually, obviously. Friday was an intriguing gray villain, where he wants to simply see the Ice Warrior race flourish again at the expense of humanity. Many aspects of this episode remind me of Tomb of the Cybermen, with the Ice Warriors trapped behind ice-like tombs in a way, and an expedition coming across the lost race. Araxa is a bit too hammy for my liking, but she's still a decent enough villain. While I did mention this before, I still majorly adore the Ice Warrior redesign, and it's arguably the best redesign from the New Who era. If I had to say any other weaknesses, the first half is a bit slow, and there is some cringy dialogue between Araxa and Bill. But outside of that, I really enjoyed this episode, and I really thought it was genuinely good. It does have some weaknesses with plot here and there, some dialogue in the pacing, but outside of that, a genuinely good episode. Number 9. The Return of Dr. Mysterio. Yes, this is very high for a very ridiculous episode, but I honestly really enjoyed it, mainly because the superhero plot brought me so much joy and put a huge smile on my face. I would dare say it's the best Superman story since The Iron Giant. You know it's a bad sign when Stephen Moffat understands Superman more than Zack Snyder and WB does. Whoops. Anyway, this was an absolute delight from start to finish. I thought the story was a perfect parallel to the Silver Age Superman stories. Justin Chatwin did a great job as both the Ghost and Grant Gordon, and the main alien plot was a bit generic, but I feel that was kind of the point. It's supposed to be a run-of-the-mill Superman story, but because that it is set in the world of Doctor Who kind of makes it more ridiculous and more fun. It borders on guilty pleasure, but I do think it's a genuinely good story with how much understanding Moffat has with the Superman core and story, and superheroes in general, even though it was probably just made to cash in on the superhero genre. Not the greatest Christmas special, or a great story, or a great Capaldi performance, but I'll take good modern Superman stories where I can fucking get them. Number 8. Thin Ice. I was surprised with how much I liked this episode. I liked the story, I liked the look, I liked the historical period piece part of it. I like how you can feel the cold through the fucking screen. It was an intriguing mystery, and while the reveal leaves a bit to be desired, I still found the journey to the ending to be very good. Bill reacting to history was very well done, and the effect of the creature was really good, especially for the budget. The main villain isn't great, just a generic evil rich guy type, which is fine, but the social commentary is again just kinda one note and boring. It does have a dark edge to it I really liked as well, darker than some other Stephen Moffat era stories. The climax is a pretty fun ticking clock finale, and it's utilized well. While this probably wouldn't be that great in any other era, as I've said before, this era I make an exception since there aren't that many great stories. But despite this, still good, intriguing, and a bit of fun as well. Number 7. Under the Lake / Before the Flood. This was a story I did expect a little bit more from. Someone said this was one of the best stories of the Capaldi era. So well done, all that stuff. But while I did think it was very good, I think the second episode is where the story suffered for me personally. The first episode is genuinely fantastic, really interesting, and kind of creepy in some areas. All the characters, mainly O'Donnell, are all really likable and distinct. The ideas with the glyphs and the bootstrap paradox are all really interesting, and I was excited where it was going to go. The second episode is a bit of a disappointment. While there was the idea of playing with time, I just didn't find the second episode to be all that interesting. You did have some emotional impact with O'Donnell getting killed because she was my favorite character, and definitely good companion material. But I didn't really feel the threat of the Fisher King, and the second episode was a bit boring. However, despite this, overall, it is still a very good story, mainly due to the first episode and some aspects of the second episode. Number 6. World Enough in Time / The Doctor Falls. This is a classic example of great build-up and somewhat lackluster payoff. I wanted to like this one more than I did because I love the Cybermen, but I felt the second episode was not as good as the first, kind of like the previous entry. The ideas in regards to the Master becoming good, the return of the Mondasian Cybermen, Bill dealing with becoming a Cyberman, and this overall story was very well done. The Master stuff was well integrated here, better than the Series 8 finale 2-parter. Plus, while he still is probably my least favorite Master, John Sim was somewhat redeemed in my eyes. Here he gives a more stoic and authoritative performance that is more worthy of the title he possesses. He still has that more juvenile aura to him that makes him that rendition of the character, but it's definitely more subdued and not as ungodly annoying as it was in the Tennant era. Sometimes it goes too far at points, like the boner joke, but for the most part, he is better here. I still don't like his rendition, but here, he felt more like the Master than he did before. The Cybermen feel a bit more like a threat here, which I appreciated. This is probably the best Cybermen story since the Age of Cybermen two-parter, which is frankly a low fucking bar, but it's still pretty damn good. The second episode feels a bit generic at points, like the explosive finale, and not as much intrigue as there could have been for Bill being a Cyberman. I also didn't like how it was resolved because Heather showing up felt like a supremely lazy Deus Ex Machina since she hadn't been mentioned since the pilot. It's not this amazing love story or anything, it just feels lazy and kind of shoehorned in there. So while I don't love this as much as other people do, and it is pretty flawed, I still thought it was a damn good story with some great bits with the Cybermen and the Master. Number 5, Robot of Sherwood. This was an episode I really didn't like when I first saw it. I found it to be so ridiculous that it revolves around Robin Hood actually existing. However, the main reason this is so high now is for one specific reason. In between from when I initially saw it to now, I watched Errol Flynn's The Adventures of Robin Hood. That alone brought a new perspective to this episode for me and made me really appreciate what it was going for. Is it perfect? No, there is still quite a bit of ridiculousness in the thread of the story, but in regards to Robin Hood and the character they were going for, it both satirizes and celebrates the over-the-top tone of the character of Robin Hood. More specifically, very early versions, with the Flynn version being the most prevalent. Moffat during his first 3 years was heavy with the fairy tale vibe in regards to the Doctor, which I've said numerous times. But with this episode, we have him almost commenting and deconstructing that idea of the fairy tale figure. It doesn't always work, and it could have been written a lot better, but for what we got, I think it was really well done and I enjoyed it. It doesn't totally reach greatness for, as I said, the threat and the commentary not always working, but I definitely appreciated it more and liked it more than when I initially watched the episode. Number 4. Sleep No More. This received mixed reviews, yet I absolutely loved this episode. The major qualm I have with this episode is the fact that the middle is a bit of bland Doctor Who running up and down hallways and that sort of thing. But the beginning and the end are genuinely great, and I didn't even mind the stuff in the middle with the Doctor trying to figure all this out. Reese Shearsmith did a really excellent job as the main villain, with the constant twists in regards to not only his character, but with the episode itself, as well as the ideas in regards to Morpheus and what that does, and the idea of found footage. This episode was very experimental, and at the very least, I respect and appreciate it. But in addition to that, it's still a really engaging and intriguing episode. Plus, I love the look of the Sandmen. Might be a bit generic, but sometimes the simplest ideas work the best. They were made of dust and sand, and that's exactly what it looked like. So it worked for me personally. And with the rest of the episode, I enjoy those experimental aspects because they landed for me. Yes, the middle is a bit slow, but for the most part, damn good episode. Number 3, Flatline. A really inventive idea, with some good effects, a really good story, some memorable characters, and just one major flaw that prevents it from being better. The Boneless are a really good one-shot villain, who I hope don't come back in the near future since they were done so well here. While the effects in Doctor Who are nothing to sneeze at, I will say that the Boneless looks surprisingly good here. I really like the story of the Doctor being trapped and a companion being forced to take his place, but the major flaw being is that it's Clara taking his place. If it was someone with an ounce of personality, this episode could have been way better, but unfortunately, we're stuck with this bitch. The story is simple, the idea is really cool, and it has some inventive ideas and story beats that made me intrigued all the way through. Not spectacular by any means, but a very good story. Plus, Rigsy is a great and likable character. Number 2, Mummy on the Orient Express. Another fantastic episode from Jamie Matheson. He honestly should have written more episodes because this, Flatline, and for the most part, Auction are really damn good. Not great by any means, but damn good. I think this story benefits from good direction in addition to good writing. It has a good fast pace and manages to keep itself busy with the mystery going on while also keeping you invested in said mystery. The Foretold looks pretty damn good. The supporting characters are all memorable and interesting in their own ways, especially Perkins, who is another companion that got away. I think the only flaws are when Clara and Maisie are together trying to figure it out. It slows down the pace, but not in a good way, and it becomes pretty dull. However, outside of that, I thought the mystery was great. The Foretold was a good villain in addition to Gus. There was a little development with the Doctor and his hatred for soldiers. Clara isn't ungodly annoying, even if her scenes slowed down the episode. And you even had the Doctor playing the manipulating chess player, which was nice to see. Overall, a damn fine episode that I majorly enjoyed. Now we have the only very great story with number 1, Heaven Sent. At the top of the list, it's no surprise that this manages to be the best story from the 12th Doctor era. It's almost a perfect episode, with the only thing that makes it very great instead of amazing is due to the fact it's followed by Hellbent. But you know all about that. But outside of that, this is a near perfect episode. Not only does it have the Doctor actually being forced to be clever and showcasing his smarts and talents, but the mystery is also really engaging in and of itself. The quieter moments by himself are really powerful, and without Capaldi, I don't think this episode could have worked as well as it did. I still stand by that Capaldi is easily one of the best actors to play the Doctor. Easily. This, and even Hellbent, just pretty much prove that. The look of the world is really interesting, how you can tell it's not normal and not really something that can exist. Well, that seems pretty obvious with how the castle fucking moves, but I mean when the Doctor is walking around a seemingly normal castle. I felt in my eyes that it still didn't seem that normal and something was off. It was a good feeling. Plus, it showcases the idea of the Doctor being a hero, exploring themes of grief, and that sort of thing. It is such a well-constructed episode and so intriguing to me that, much like with everyone else, I couldn't help but think it was a very great episode. Too bad it's ruined with the next episode. So, next up, we get to companions. Of course, the worst is still Clara. She just got so bad with 12 that half the reason why the series 8 and 9 episodes aren't as good is because of her. It seems like Moffat finally settled on a character trait with her, and it still doesn't work. She's like trying to be this quirky and relatable girl, and she comes off as annoying and one-dimensional. Then on top of that, she tries so hard to be the Doctor when she just fucking isn't. And it's what gets her killed initially because she doesn't learn the fact that she just isn't the Doctor. Unfortunately, on top of that, she still manages to live, and the Doctor gets his memories back of her because Moffat just cannot let this character fucking die. On top of that, there were like 4 or 5 different times this bitch could have fucking left, but Moffat couldn't let her go, and Coleman wouldn't fuck off. First, she should have died at the end of Name of the Doctor, but nope, she lives because of reasons. Then, she should have left after Deep Breath and not being able to handle regeneration, despite the fact she witnesses the Doctor's entire timeline. But no, she didn't. Then, she should have left after Death in Heaven, after the death of Danny Pink, but nope, she didn't. Then, the idea of old Clara shouldn't have been a dream, and the Doctor leaves her in Last Christmas, but nope, that didn't happen either. Then, she finally should have died in Face the Raven, but that didn't fucking happen either. Fuck Clara. Worst companion of New Who, possibly ever. Moving on. Now, we get to River Song. Major step up. However, due to the fact that she only appears in 1 episode and the fact it's not very good, she's lower. But Capaldi and Kingston have impeccable chemistry, and it's certainly a lot less weird, because the Doctor at this point doesn't look like he's 12. So there is that. Unfortunately, not much else outside of this. Sorry, River. Then we have Bill Potts. I was worried about Bill, because a lot of people said she was really annoying and her sexuality is constantly referenced like Curtis Holt on Arrow, but honestly, she's not that bad. In fact, she's pretty damn good. She has an enjoyable presence, isn't ball-gradingly annoying, and I like the relationship she has with the Doctor, how it's more of a teacher-student relationship rather than whatever the fuck he and Clara were. She does have some cringy lines here and there, and sometimes does stupid shit, like with the monks in Pyramid at the End of the World. But for the most part, she felt like a modernization of a classic Who companion, similar to Donna. Although not as good as Donna, but still, she was definitely a good one. Plus, with the low bar that is Clara Oswald, you could only go up from there. Then my favorite is easily Nardole. While his introduction could have been a lot better, and he was a bit annoying, I liked what they did after that, how both he and the Doctor were constantly thorns in each other's sides and had a good back and forth with one another. He was essentially comic relief and the voice of reason smushed together into one. He isn't that great of a character on his own, and he is pretty one note, but considering he's a very likable character, and he does have good chemistry with the Doctor, I think he worked here. And so he remains my favorite, as well as the fact we don't have a ton to work with here. So here we are. Plus, I think it worked that he wasn't always there constantly and was more of a side character than a companion. Now for the Doctor and his era. Peter Capaldi's 12th Doctor is... I actually don't know what he is. He's just sort of this weird blip in the idea of New Who. Like the idea of him couldn't fit neatly into the core of classic Who. That, in addition to Stephen Moffat kind of being at the end of his rope during his era, is probably why Peter Capaldi as the Doctor never really took off. I see a lot of classic Who fans loving Capaldi's Doctor, while New Who fans do not. Not saying all of them, but quite a few. Plus, you probably had the Smith fangirls being like, ew, why is the Doctor old and unattractive? Hence why they jumped ship, similar to how the Tennant fangirls jumped ship when he regenerated. I like him a lot, and I liked the phases he has during his era, always trying to shake it up while staying true to his iteration of the character. Like in Series 8, he was more rough, angry, and hardened, constantly snapping at people and that sort of thing, while also having his small eccentricities. Then, in Series 9, he sort of had this fuck all, I don't care mentality, and leaned into more the eccentric nature of the Doctor. Then, in Series 10, he had this mad scientist mentality, like a British Doc Brown almost, but still had that layer of deep-rooted anger at points. I really liked how it constantly changed and seemed fresh. He is kind of like Seven in my eyes, where I am a bit indifferent towards his Doctor. Don't totally love, nor do I totally hate him. However, I do still appreciate him more than Seven, mainly because, as some other people have stated, you can take the 12th Doctor and put him into any other era of the show and he would fit perfectly. The old, sophisticated man in a box like the first? Sure. Sarcastic know-it-all with a god complex like 6? Absolutely. The dark PTSD war veteran like 9? Definitely. Capaldi is a Doctor that just encompasses everything that came before while also being fresh and new, kind of like the 4th Doctor at the time. In addition to the fact that Capaldi always gave a great performance every single episode. He never phoned it in or was bored or just trying to go into the next scene. Kind of like Colin Baker, another magnificent actor who had subpar material. Capaldi always nailed it, even when dealing with some of the worst writing in the show so far. With that, we enter his era. This is definitely the more mixed aspect because most of this era felt very, very tired. You could tell Moffat was overworked and didn't really care about Doctor Who that much anymore. But with that, let's get into some positives. I liked that the era felt very different from the 11th Doctor era, which was more eccentric and droll. The 12th Doctor era, very much like the Doctor itself, was very bitter and cynical. Maybe it was what Moffat was feeling towards the show at the time, so he decided to insert that into the tone. I don't know, but it does make sense if he did do that. Series 8 was sort of run-of-the-mill, trying to find its footing, kind of stumbling and falling, but certainly an improvement over last series. Series 9 tried to be experimental and a bit more out there, but many of the stories still kind of fell flat, and the hybrid storyline was incredibly dull. Series 10 being a soft reboot very much helped matters, and it shook off most of the crappiness of the previous 2 series, and having a fresh start while still within its roots. The stories were better and much more interesting, with very few mediocre or bad stories. Considering, at least the rumor was, that Capaldi wanted to do 5 series, I think this could have been the start of Capaldi's best years if it stuck the course, but considering who came next, maybe it was for the better he left after 3 series. The era as a whole was probably better than the 11th Doctor era because Series 7 was that bad, while Series 8 to 10 was always middling, never great, but never bad either. But you could probably say that's worse because nothing ever stuck out, not even the greatness of Heaven Sent because it didn't have a certain aspect to it that could have made it better. This era was fine, but nothing great, and that's very unfortunate because Capaldi is a great Doctor who deserved better. So, those are my thoughts on the 12th Doctor era. It had some ups and downs, but the ups never reached the greatness it could be, while the bad was never anger-inducing, with the exception of Hellbent. But even then, I didn't hate it as much as other people did. But the era just kind of was. A very indifferent era that I didn't hate as much as I originally thought I would. But it isn't one that is all that memorable. Peter Capaldi is arguably the best actor out of the New Who era to have played the Doctor. He was supremely excellent and always gave a worthwhile performance, despite dealing with subpar material not worthy of his talents, somewhat similar to the Colin Baker era, as I said. With this, I rank him 9th, but he is definitely not bad. Not bad at all. So, as I stated before, don't expect the 13th Doctor, Doctor Who ranked, until much later. Whenever the 3rd special is going to be, I'm going to do it sometime after that. Obviously, I'm still going to be watching it, unfortunately, but it's not going to be as, quick as, obviously, the other ones have been. So, in the meantime, I'll probably do some other Doctor Who ranked, I'll rank Doctors, intros, logos, Dalek stories, Cybermen stories, that kind of thing. In the meantime, and I am preparing, it's probably not going to come out soon. I would maybe even say not even this year, but I do plan to do an alternate version of Doctor Who ranked. I won't get into it, but stay tuned for that as well. For upcoming videos, it's pretty much the only ones I really have planned are post-Justice League 5 casting. But outside of that, who knows? I might do a Dickinson video. I might do more of those off-the-cuff videos if I have anything in mind. I have a few how to fix ideas here and there. But outside of that, nothing really planned. So if you have any ideas for future videos, please leave in the comments below, because I'm always open to more ideas, and I really don't want this channel to reach a standstill, because then that means it goes to the shitter in YouTube's eyes. So, yeah, that's about it. I will let you know if there's anything coming up, or if I have any other ideas. Later.